Later on, inspired him to go into economics and try to find the new ways of economic views and economic models. The 1968 is also significant because a lot of events happened 50 years ago that that are quite reminiscent to 2018. I shall now leave you in the hands of Dr. Christopher Houghton, but please give him a big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Cool. So, good evening, everybody. First, some preliminary remarks. Is the sound working?
Yeah.
It's okay? And is the camera okay? So I need to explain something first of all. This is being filmed, which is why it's a bit set up, and on the backs of your head. So if you don't want to be in the film, keep looking at me. Right? I won't be offended if you don't, but if you're not looking at me, you're going to be filmed. So the reason for that is the film, which I'll explain a bit later, was made in 1968 in Berkeley, in the thick of all the riots and everything. And apparently it's becoming a kind of cult film. And the professor from Columbia University called me up a few days ago and said, "Are you the guy who was involved in making The Activist? Because if you are, can you please film your presentation? Because I will then make this an archived movie in my department in Columbia of such movies. And then I'll come over in July and then I'd like to interview." So I agreed to that. And so if you don't want to be filmed, you have to look this way because we don't want to fill out any forms. All right? So that's why it's kind of a bit like this and why I've got this lovely jacket on and everything else, right? So if it's a bit posy, it's because it's being filmed. We decided not to live stream it because Joseph and I don't have enough friends in the world to do that. But it might end up on the web, so just be aware. That's why it's a bit strange. And it's going to be kind of multimedia because I'm speaking and then Joseph is the MC. And the idea is I will do a presentation, which I did a couple of months ago. Then we'll have a break and buy some things at the bar. And then we'll go back to a second session, which will start with a short movie about my work in Folkestone. And then we will go into conversation or heckling or whatever you want to do. But heckling is the later part of the evening, right? In case there are any hecklers in the room. Yeah, so you can heckle in French because no one will understand. Okay, so I'm going to, and now we have some kind of techie constraints. So I'm going to walk through these slides fairly briskly because they tell their own story in a way. And at 30 minutes, there's going to be a wave, and I have to stop while this is rebooted. And again, at 15 minutes, I have to stop. So there'll be things like this going on, just so if I start waving, it's because of this. Now, this is a series of slides. It's about me, but not about me. And the idea is to look at 1968 through my actual experience of being there. And so the period of time when I was there was from my age of 18 to 21, which in my earlier version I made a big deal about the importance of that age if you're a young person. Since there's no young people here, there's no point talking about it. It's too late. Right? But you have to imagine all this was happening to me from the period of 18 to 21. So if you go back to that time when you were all in grammar school or whatever you were doing, this is what I was doing. And then it focuses on the period from January 1967 to April 69, because in January 1967, a certain event happened in my life, and it culminated in April 1969. So that's the kind of time frame of this presentation. And it began with me being bored in Tunbridge Wells. So I had been on a yacht in the Mediterranean, and I went home, and I was in the winter in Tunbridge Wells pumping gas, because this is for an American. And I got very bored, but then the phone rang, and I had a telephone call from the Houghton Hotel. So I was kind of 18 at the time, and the Houghton Hotel phone call was from this man. His name is Dick Ross. This is his wife, Maureen, and this is me. And he, he rang up to say, "Are you Christopher? Because you have a good reputation as a sailor, and I need a sailor because my wife is not strong enough to lift the anchor on our yacht. And so if you want, you get the job, but you have to come to the Hilton." So I went to the Houghton a few days later, met him, and then I was flown out to Malta to join my yacht. The photograph's not very good. The boat is amazing. It's called Scorpio. Now it's called something else. It's now in the Hamptons in New York, but here it's in Venice, as you can tell from the buildings. And so this is my life, living on a yacht, and this is me kind of blurred, so you can't really see, but that is me, age 18, on that yacht. And the reason I was on that yacht, or part of the story was, this is my second yacht, and I'd already formed two ambitions. One was to go to the Caribbean on a yacht, and the second was to join the US Armed Forces. I won't linger on that story, but that arose because I met a sailor in Malta, where I was based, who was an American sailor, but he spoke Cockney. And I said, how come you speak Cockney so well? And he said, because I am Cockney. So then I said, how come you're in the American Navy? He said, because anyone can join the armed forces. So then I said, okay, that's it. So I made this decision. And the job on the yacht had a bonus that at the end of the 8 months we were in the Mediterranean, I would be taken with the yacht back to America, or the yacht would go back to America and I would go to nurse it. And so I went on the yacht to New York, and then we went all the way down the inland waterway to West Palm Beach, which had been built by the guy whose boat I was living on. So this is kind of a very strange experience for someone who was 18. And when I got there, I'd been invited by other yacht friends I had to go to Los Angeles if ever I got there. So I went to Los Angeles. And there I began to lead the life of Riley. This is not a Riley, this is an MG. But this is me leading the life of Riley. And this is not my car, but it is my haircut. And it was my suit. And this is a restored MG TC, I think it was, that my boss owned. And this was a couple who made various movies in America. And 35mm movies like Too Much Too Soon, if you're a movie buff, or Ride the Wild Surf, if you're a surfing film buff. And then earlier one was Whirlybirds, this amazing series from the 50s of these helicopters with the highway patrol. But they got bored with Hollywood 35, so they decided to buy 16mm cameras. This is me hiding behind one. And this is an Eclair, which was in those days was quite revolutionary. It's a French camera, and you could twist it in all sorts of directions. So, cut a long story short, they said, would you like to join us? We're going to go to Berkeley to make a film about the free speech movement. We will be there for 6 weeks because it's cinema verité, and the two stars of the film are actual students. It's a true story about their love affair set against the free speech movement in California in the 1960s, late 60s, middle 60s, I should say. So we have all this TV footage, and then we just need to go there for 6 weeks to locate them and recreate their love story, and then that's going to be the movie, and then we'll come back. So in February 1968, I went to Berkeley with Joe and Art Napoleon, their two sons who were my age, and we were the film crew. And then we spent a long time making the film, because when we got to Berkeley, I discovered other things had been happening while I was in America, which I was oblivious, because I was going to go to the Caribbean on a yacht and join the American Armed Forces. The reason I wanted to do that was, after 2 years in the American Armed Forces, you could get the GI Bill, which meant they'd pay your university education. So my plan was I wanted to be a car designer. My plan was to go to America, join the US Armed Forces, get stationed in Suffolk behind a desk, right? And after 2 years, go back to America and complete my education and become a car designer. But I didn't know about this man. And this is Che Guevara. And already in 1967, he was murdered in Bolivia. And I didn't know about this man. This is Mario Savio, and he was the one who'd begun the whole free speech movement in 66, I think, in California. This is on Berkeley campus, and this was the beginning of all the complications that arose. I didn't know about him, and I didn't know about this, which was blocking the draft. So the draft is what the Americans called conscription. And in those days, in order to feed the Vietnam War machine, you had the draft. And these were young students who were blocking entrance into what's called an induction center. Induction center, you would go there and you'd go through a 4-hour test, and then you'd come out classified. When I first went to America, I was classified 4Y, alien, not currently liable. But because I had a dodgy, careful what I'm going to say now, because my visa was extended in an interesting way, I got to be there for more than 1 year. But that made me alien liable. So then I was going to face induction. So this is about stopping the draft. I also didn't know about the Oakland 7, who had been indicted for trying to stop the draft. So if you try and stop the American military, if you read your tweets, this is not a clever thing to do, now nor then. And one of them was this guy, Mike Smith. He was one of the Oakland 7, and they were indicted. They were sent to trial for trying to block the wall. So welcome to 1968, Christopher. And so we went to Berkeley to make this film. It's called The Activist. It's not very focused, I can see, but it was made by Joe and Art Napoleon. And this is Mike Smith, who was our star. He was a leader of the student movement. And this is Leslie Gilb, who they fell in love. She became a quite well-known actress. But this is the star of our show. This is their love story against this background. And the film was financed by a guy in Hollywood. It was eventually shown in the Midwest, so it could bomb quietly. I don't know if it did bomb, because they never kept me up to date on the royalties. So, and here's a very trendy thing. This is Hollywood figuring out how do we market this in the Midwest, so we'll have a CND badge and we'll break it. Not quite sure what that means, but we've broken out of the bonds of CND. So this is a very serious film, and this is one of the stills. And what you can't see in here, this is Mike Smith, and this is the 2 boys I work with. He's now the president of the American Association of Editors. I don't know what he does. And this is me in my hood, because we were filming ourselves demonstrating against the police about all this. And this is a shot of Berkeley campus, and by then it had gone from free speech to get out of Vietnam. So that was all very nice, and we went early February for 6 weeks, but we got caught up in all this, and then it got worse and worse. So on April the 4th, this is Martin Luther King, just before he was shot, and this is such a convulsion in the United States. I don't know what it was like here, because I wasn't here, but I know what it was like in Berkeley with all this stuff going on. And then all hell broke loose. I've cut out this, but I just want to make a reference that 2 days later, Nina Simone wrote and sung this song, The King of Love is Dead. And this just stoked all the kind of angst of those involved in stopping the war. It got worse. This is a guy called Huey P. Newton, and normally you see him with a gun and a fist and a black beret, but I wanted to show this picture. This is him getting his doctorate, in which typically he thought, so we can change America. And then he went off to start changing America, but you don't do that in America. So then he became the Huey P. Newton everybody knows, the revolutionary. So this is May, and then we came to June the 6th, and everyone knows where they were when John Kennedy was shot. At least I think those of you, I should say, everyone who was alive at the time knows where they were looking at this young audience. Not many of you remember that. But those of us who were living in Berkeley remember when this took place. I happened to be driving down the highway, and you could hardly keep the car on the road when this came on the news, that he was shot in this hotel in Los Angeles. And the reason we chose April the 4th for the first showing was because that was Martin Luther King's assassination day. And the reason we chose tonight is because this is Bobby Kennedy's assassination day, if you can say such things. And there, because, she's my big thing, I just wanted to kind of remind us of this song that she sings, Nina Simone, or when she was alive, she sang it. And that's kind of the story, really. But it all was hotting up. And by then, things were being organized, especially in the third world. So you had the SDS, which is white students for democratic society, and they were doing their thing. But the serious players were the Third World Liberation Front, because in the Bay Area, San Francisco, Berkeley, all the minority ethnic groups have their communities, so it's very vibrant. Then it was. And there was this thing created called the Third World Liberation Front. And for reasons I won't go into, it had a committee, and I was the only white person on this committee. I had a badge, TWLF, black, brown, red, yellow, but I was only on the only white guy. And that committee ran the strikes, closed the university, closed San Francisco State College for 6 months, which was my night job. Filming was my day job. And this is a scene from, again, it's not good focus, but this is a particular day when 500 students were arrested in one operation by what we then called, or what I then called, the pigs. So these are pigs arresting my colleagues. And that day was very memorable for me because this guy, called Charles Gary, he was a civil rights lawyer, and he was given the task of finding 500 pro bono lawyers for these 500 students, and he gave that task to me to index all these lawyers to these students. So I was quite embedded in all this world. And then this is a scene again of "Hell no, we won't go," which was one of the slogans to stop people going to the war. And as I said, I went there in February '68 for 6 weeks. The film took over a year to make because we had so many curfews, so many riots, so much chaos going on, and our stars were constantly not available because they're out there on the barricades and doing stuff, and it was getting worse and worse. So one of my jobs was I had lived in an apartment, and there was a street which went up behind the university campus, and from my front window, I could see if the National Guard were coming in at 6 o'clock in the morning. This was one of my jobs. And if the National Guard went up, you knew this was going to be a fun day. So part of what I did then was get the handkerchief, get the Vaseline on your face and the wet handkerchief in your pocket, ready for the tear gas, and then go to work. And at the time I had a friend. She was the daughter of a diplomat, of a close friend of Allende, his consul actually in America. And luckily for me, we went to demonstrations in their Jaguar with a CD plate. So that meant, for example, on one day when some outside agitator had set the whole proceedings off and the riots began, then when it got too hot, we went and jumped in the Jaguar and shut the door, because you can't touch people in the core diplomatic car. This is how it works. So we just recovered and then so on. So I was completely embedded in that world, and I won't go on and on about it, but I could for hours, which is what this guy wants to talk about, because it was such an amazing experience. But out of that, I'd overstayed my welcome in the United States, or rather, I'd become eligible for the draft. So in April '69, I was called up to the American Army, finally, but by then I decided I didn't want to be called up in the American Army. So I went to the induction center in California, in Los Angeles, and I was reclassified 1A. And in my agitprop days, we had a whole skit, and it ended up 1A, take him away. So and you knew if you got inducted, and it happened to me, you would get a letter from the United States President welcoming you into the United States Armed Forces and telling you which boot camp you have to report to 6 weeks later. That letter arrived to me in England because once, I can say this, I think, once I'd been regraded to 1A, take him away, when I came out of the induction center, I went and made a phone call to my rich friend in New York, who's now dead, so I'm not putting him in a mess, and said, hey, Dick, I have a problem. I need to go home very quickly, but I haven't got any money. Can you help me out? He said, oh, sure. Yeah, how much do you need? So I said, well, I need to get a flight to London from LA. He said, okay, it'll be there in half an hour. Just go to the Western Union. Wait a minute. Maureen is trying to say something. Maureen's saying you can't go back to England until you come and see us, but we're on our yacht in the outer islands of the Bahamas. So there'll be enough money to get you from LA to West Palm Beach, to Nassau, to the outer islands, and then back and off to London. See you in a couple of days. So then I went away from the American Army, back onto Scorpio in the Bahamas. And there I had a very strange experience. I thought, finally, I'm poised to go down to the Caribbean. I just have a slight problem with my last year of activism. And where do I park all this revolutionary zeal I had, reading Grandma every day, reading Guevara, reading all this stuff, and becoming totally immersed in this? Do I stay on this boat, and if so, how do I explain this to my colleagues back in the Bay Area? But I was let off this hook because I went in the yacht club, still trying to get a job on a yacht, and there was a guy there, and he said, "Do you want a crew in the Caribbean?" And I said, "Yes, actually." But then this strange experience happened. I don't know whether he heard it or whether it even happened, but this voice said to me, "No, Christopher, your task is the metamorphosis of capitalism. Go home."
As you do.
As one does, right? This is a true story. And then it got even worse because I thought so I said no thank you to my first aim. I'd already said no thank you to the second one. And so now I wasn't in the United States Forces, and I wasn't going to get a job on a yacht in the Caribbean. I was going to go back to London to metamorphose capitalism, according to this little voice I heard. And I then got immediately ill, itching and all kind of weird went on, and I had to immediately leave early and go to Nassau. When I got to Nassau, it all stopped. So then I had 3 days to spare, during which I met my first wife. This is my second one. And then I went back to London, and then I forgot about it because I had to pay off the debt. But I paid off the debt by delivering Red Dwarf, as it turned out. For those of you who are old enough to know, Red Dwarf was a revolutionary magazine. The editor was Tariq Ali, right, who's a bit like me. He dresses a bit like this now. But then we dressed a bit like that. And I ended up working with this printer who was the printer of Red Dwarf. So I kept my connection, sort of. But then I had this problem. I'm supposed to be metamorphosing capitalism, and I kind of ignored it. But a year or so later, I met a friend in Switzerland, and I hadn't met her for a long time, so we had a big California hug time. And she said, "So what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm supposed to be metamorphosing capitalism, but I'm not. So I better get on with it." So this is the start of my career. And that's kind of where we ended on the last presentation. And then Riley said, who's not here tonight, "So did you?" And so what we thought this evening was I'd kind of recap that story, slightly shorter, and then we'd move on to, so did I? And if I did, why am I in Folkestone? Because my answer was, I did. It's called Youth Bonds in Folkestone. So that's the kind of presentation bit I wanted to do. Then we thought, pause on the Q&A and the heckling, right? We'd have a little fag break for those who can't possibly live without a cigarette, right? And then we're going to resume, watch a short film about youth bonds in Folkestone, and then we go into heckling mode, or agreeing with me mode, doesn't really matter. Okay? Are we in? Cool.